Joining us now is former DeKalb County District Attorney, now working in private practice, Robert James. Mr. James, thanks so much for being with us. You know the process and how it's going to play out in the courthouse. How will reporting to the courthouse work for former President Trump and all of his allies indicted in this case when they first come for their arraignments?
Sure. So before the arraignments in Georgia, when someone is indicted, there's a grand jury arrest warrant that's issued if the case did not originate with a police officer, like this case. And so the first thing that's going to happen is that they're going to turn themselves in. I believe DA Willis indicated that she would give them until next Friday. And so they're going to go through the process of booking. Now, they're not going to sit inside of a jail cell or anything, like that, but they will go into central booking. I expect it'll be a very private affair. No cameras, I wouldn't expect. There'll be a mugshot, most likely. There's going to be fingerprints, and their personal information is going to be given. The same thing that happens in every bookend. And I would expect everyone that's indicted to go through this process. After that, they're going to get a notice to come back for an arraignment calendar. That's typically a month to 2 months, anywhere between 30 days and 90 days out. And they're going to come to court, and they'll essentially answer the charges. They will call the defendant's name. The defendant will stand up and they will plead guilty or not guilty. Typically that's not a day for a lot of fanfare, a lot of motions, a lot of grandstanding. That's just for that purpose, to be made aware of what you're charged with. And that's really when things kind of start after that arraignment calendar. That's when the motions start getting filed. That's when, you get a potential trial date. And that's really when the fireworks happen after that.
So knowing how this works and presuming that you have read the indictment and you've seen the evidence that Fani Willis has laid out, what are the chances between now and when we see those folks go in for an arraignment that talks begin for the possibility of a deal that someone might flip? And what would DA Willis look at in making a decision about whether or not to offer someone a deal?
Sure. Well, let's start with the last question. What will she look at to determine whether to offer someone a deal? It's always how useful they are, right? You're not going to just, the time for deals essentially is over for the most part, because, you had enough to indict the case. You feel comfortable trying the case at this point, because if you didn't, as a prosecutor, you should not indict it. And so it's going to be, sort of a use-based analysis, right? If I were her, I would look to see, okay, do I really need this witness? Right? Is this witness credible? And so, that's where that process starts. I would not be surprised, if that happened. But if it does happen, it's more than likely going to be someone that's on the lower rung of this alleged conspiracy. I expect a lot of the larger name public officials like Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, state senators, so forth and so on. I would be surprised if they flipped as sort of a zero-sum game for them.
When you're talking about how useful they would be and pointing to maybe the lower rung co-defendants here, are you talking about the co-defendants who approached Ruby Freeman and her mother and tried to get them to not flip, but confess to election interference, confess to changing votes? Are they going to be helpful? And if so, how?
So, yes, they would be helpful. Ultimately, as a prosecutor, listen, obviously, Donald Trump is the main name in this, right? There are other individuals who have big names, but his is the biggest. And so when you're talking to someone on the lower rung of a conspiracy and you want to flip them, or you want to ask them to turn state's evidence and testify and become a witness, ultimately, you're looking to see if they can connect the dots, right? Some of these acts may be easy to prove when you're saying Donald Trump did this, Rudy Giuliani did this, but the indictment also says knowing, willful. And you need evidence to prove that something was knowingly done or something was willfully done. And so when you speak with these co-defendants that you're trying to flip, if in fact that happens, you want to hear, facts and evidence and conversations that took place that would allow you to prove what we call mens rea, or state of mind.
Mr. James, some of the former federal prosecutors, including candidates like Chris Christie, have been very disparaging of this indictment of Fani Willis using RICO. Have you ever tried a RICO case? And tell us why the RICO law in Georgia is very different from the federal RICO law, and why it specifically could be tailored as a powerful weapon for this case.
Well, it's not very different from the federal RICO law. As a matter of fact, our RICO law here in Georgia was patterned after the federal RICO law. It's a little bit easier to use. There are things around enterprise that you have to prove under federal law that you don't have to prove under state law, but it's pretty much the same thing. You know, listen, this is an opinion, right? Some people will say that using RICO in a case like this is like using a sledgehammer to kill an ant, right? Some people will say that it's not, that it's a powerful tool that allows you to bring in assorted criminal activity and some activity that's not criminal, but that perhaps may be unethical, and tell the full story, right? Because when you stand back and look at it, you know, things, you see this potential crime, you see that potential crime, but ultimately the prosecutor has to bring it together and prove that it was done as part of a scheme. And so RICO allows you to tie it together. I don't know that you could successfully prosecute this many individuals for, you know, a broad, you know, array of crimes like this unless you did use RICO.